Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today, in honor of Mother's Day, which is this weekend in North America at least, I wanted to put together a video celebrating the characters in fantasy who I think are the best drawn mother characters. So all of the mothers that I'm going to talk about today are the central protagonists of their novels. And outside the fact that I think that these are fantastic motherly characters, I also think that the 5 books that I'm going to recommend to you today are just excellent books in their own right. So obviously the portrayal of the central figures is a large part of what I think makes a book really good, but I genuinely think that these books have excellent plots, that they are written really well, and they're just books that I would recommend to anybody who loves reading fantasy. I have 5 mothers that I'm going to talk about today, and I have talked about a couple of these books before, but I'll be spending less time on the plot and more time about what I think makes the characters really stand out. And the first character on this list is someone that I'm sure you have heard a lot about in the last week, because the book that she is in was just recently released and it is very highly anticipated, and that is Orca in John Gwynne's Shadow of the Gods. So for anyone who has not heard about this book yet, The Shadow of the Gods is the first book in a new series by John Gwynne called the Bloodsworn Saga, and it is his interpretation of a Norse-inspired fantasy. It follows 3 central characters, so Orca, the mother in question, Elvar, who is a noblewoman seeking battle fame, and Varg, who is an escaped thrall who is seeking revenge for a heinous act that was carried out against somebody that he loves. And the fate of these 3 characters will kind of cross over and become intertwined over the course of this novel. It's a very grim, bleak novel set in the style of the sagas, the Norwegian sagas, and it has been highly received by almost everybody that I have seen talking about it on YouTube. I personally thought it was a fantastic book and probably John Gwynne's strongest beginning to a series yet. But what I want to talk about today is the character of Orca. And all of the moms that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about the frame of motherhood that is explored in the novels in which they are the protagonist. So here in The Shadow of the Gods, the character of Orca is a very determined character. I think she's going to be a fast favorite for a lot of the people who read this series, but she is very strong, very tenacious, very determined, and she will protect her family against anything. She will take down anyone who gets in the way of protecting her family. And the way that her story is set up is that in this land of Ygritte, which is where they live, there are whisperings that children are being stolen from their families. And Orca, who has a violent past that we're not really sure of the full extent of, lives in an isolated pocket of the countryside with her husband Thorkel and her young son Brekka. And we see in the opening chapters how Orca's experiences in the past, how her fear and her anxiety has influenced her parenting style. She very much wants to she very much wants to make her son strong. She wants to harden him against the brutal realities of the world in which they live. And you can see that come to life through her interactions with Brekka. She is, as I said, very frightened that something is going to happen to him, that someone's going to try to harm him in some way. And what we see come to life through Orca is that brutal, animalistic, primal kind of side of motherhood that will drive you to defend your family and defend your children against any odds. And as anxiety and anger are very closely linked, we see how Orca's fears, how her worries as a parent give rise to this explosive anger that will drive her to defeat anyone who gets in the way of her family's safety. She is a really compelling character. Aside from being really complex and well developed, she's also just a lot of fun to follow. So if you're looking for an epic fantasy with a great action-driven plot and a fantastic mother at the center of the story, then I definitely think you should read John Gwynne's Shadow of the Gods. The second character that I want to explore today is the character of Misaki from M.L. Wang's standalone fantasy novel, The Sword of Kaigen. So just to give you a little bit of setup, The Sword of Kaigen is a novel that follows a group of families that live on a mountainous or rocky outcrop on the peninsula of the Great Kaigenese Empire. The people who live on this peninsula are renowned warriors who can control the elements, and they're looked at in society as the first line of defense against anybody on the outside who would like to come and attack the Kaigenese Empire. They are a very strong, very loyal, very honor-based society, and it is a patriarchal society. So in this group of warriors, men are looked on as the warriors and women as the wives and mother figures. And we follow two main characters in this novel, the character of Misaki, who is a mother, and her oldest son, Mamoru, who is, I believe, 15 when the novel begins. And the setup for the novel is that there is a new person who moves into this small, isolated community and starts to teach Mamoru that maybe the life that happens outside of this very isolated pocket of Kaigen is very different from what they've been led to believe. And this realization starts to spark a lot of discontent within Mamoru, and then there are whispers of war on the horizon. This is a very emotional novel. We follow a mother and a son who have a very strained and difficult relationship due to the circumstances of Misaki's entry into motherhood. So this is a very different portrayal of motherhood from The Shadow of the Gods, which I just talked about, but it is probably the most nuanced portrayal of a mother in fantasy, or really in any type of literature that I have ever read. The character of Misaki is an absolutely phenomenal character. As we get to know Misaki, this is a very character-based novel, and as we get to know Misaki, we see how she has changed from a very fiery, very driven, very passionate person in her youth to a very stoic and subdued person in her journey through being a wife and a mother. The society in which she lives is very restricted, very limited for women, and any strengths that she may have had as a warrior in the past, she feels would only bring shame to her family in the present. And this is a portrayal of motherhood that you don't often get to see. It is the fact that for a lot of women, for many women who enter into motherhood, whether willingly or unwillingly, have experienced this loss of identity where they feel that they cannot reconcile the people that they were before having children with the person that they have become after having children. And while this can be a very rewarding and a great experience for many, there are unfortunately a lot of women who struggle through this. And this is something that is still not widely acknowledged or recognized. I think that this book deals very well with really difficult topics such as postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, how that can impact your bond with your child and the way that you view yourself in terms of being a mother. We get to see Misaki grow immensely over the course of this novel to realize how repressing the person that she is has had consequences not only on herself, but on her marriage, on her family, on her children. And she is just a phenomenal character. She is one of my favorite fantasy characters of all time. And this made The Sword of Kaigen one of my favorite books that I read last year. If you're looking for a very complex and multi-dimensional portrayal of motherhood, then definitely pick up The Sword of Kaigen. After that darker portrayal of motherhood, I'd like to jump into something a little more lighthearted. And this fantasy mother is Mrs. Frisbie, who is a mouse character from the book Mrs. Frisbie and the Rats of NIMH. So this was a 1972 Newbery Honor winner, and it was also made into an animated film called The Secret of NIMH. So you may be familiar with the story through that. The film is very different in terms of plot, but very similar in terms of theme. The setup for this middle grade story is that Mrs. Frisbie is a recently widowed mouse, and her young son Timmy falls ill just as they're supposed to relocate from the farmer's field into the forest in springtime. So the plow is about to start up, their home is about to be destroyed, but her young son is too sick to be taken out of the home and moved, and she's afraid that he might die. So Mrs. Frisbie sets off on a quest to find out how to help her son, and she is pointed in the direction of the mysterious rats of NIMH. And what this story is something that really breaks away from that good versus evil setup that you see in a lot of stories meant for young children. And it gives kids or adults, because I think that this book is good for anyone, it gives you a story that focuses much more on family, on what is the nature of bravery, what does it mean to be courageous, instead of pinning an antagonist against a against a protagonist. So Mrs. Frisbie is battling against her own fear, against her own anxiety, and she is learning how she can be brave, despite the fact that she is not as smart as the rats of NIMH, that she is the widow of a mouse who was known as the most courageous mouse in the world. She can find that quiet bravery within herself, and it rises to the surface because of the love that she has for her family. This is a really interesting middle grade novel, and I think that it is a classic for a reason. It defies that genre categorization. It is a book written for young children, but it is not in any way childish. I think that this would make a fantastic book to read with your kids. I have read it twice with my kids and they absolutely love it, but it would also make a good palate cleanser or a good short book to pick up between longer fantasies, because I think it has a lot of really poignant things to say about the nature of scientific research, about family bonds, about the nature of courage, and it is just a really satisfying, really warm read. The fourth mother character is one that I talked a little bit about in my April wrap-up, and this is the character of Jenny from Barbara Hambly's novel Dragonsbane. So as I said in my April wrap-up, Dragonsbane's kind of claim to fame is that it was one of the early fantasy loves of Brandon Sanderson, who is obviously one of the most popular fantasy writers today. This is the story of Jenny, who is a witch, and she is the lover of a man named John, who is known across the country that they live in as the Dragonsbane. He slew a dragon in their early life and was given rule over a small holding, which has since fallen into disrepair and disarray. At the beginning of the story, a young man from the capital comes seeking out John so that he can get help from this legendary Dragonsbane, and instead crashes into Jenny and finds out that the hero that he has heard so much about may not live up to the stories that he has created in his mind. And although the story is called Dragonsbane, it is very much Jenny's story. Jenny is a middle-aged witch who has entered into a relationship with John, and with him has had 2 children. And she is living a very alternative style of motherhood. To be a witch in this world means that you are supposed to single-mindedly dedicate yourself to the craft of building up your power. Witchcraft in this story is carried out through meditation. You need to be able to have a singular focus, and as such, having a family or any emotional ties is frowned upon. It's almost like being a Jedi Knight in Star Wars. You're supposed to maintain no close personal connections so that you can focus on your inner well-being and the manifestation of your power. And Jenny is this witch who is caught between this overpowering love that she feels for her family and this desire to be more powerful than she is. She is plagued by regret because she feels as if she has not dedicated enough time to her family, and so she has abandoned them in some way. And then she feels as though she has not dedicated enough time to herself and to the honing of her witchcraft, and so she feels like she has failed in terms of being a magic user. And although this book was written in the 80s, I feel like it paints a particularly good picture of what it's like to be a working mom today, when you have these 2 sides of yourself that are tugging against each other, and you feel like you can't fully fulfill your obligations to your career and your passion and your goals, but you also feel like you're failing in terms of spending quality time with your family, or you feel as if you're receiving judgment from the outside because you are not present enough as a mother and you're not doing all of the things that society feels as though you should do. It is a really, really fascinating look at motherhood, and I think very progressive for the time that it was written. This was obviously a time historically, when women started to go outside the home more, they were starting to break down those barriers and build up that frontier. And you can very much see that coming to life through the character of Jenny. However, if you are not a mother, if you do not want to be a mother, I think there's still a lot to be found in this novel. It is a very interesting look at what it means to be a hero, about the nature of regret. Even though Jenny's regret is tied very closely to her motherhood, I think that it is something that you can easily identify with if you are in that middle stage of your life and you are looking back wondering, did I do what I set out to do? Is this the life that I was meant to lead? So there are a lot of really interesting questions like that, and I think that Dragonsbane is definitely an underappreciated work of classic fantasy, and I would highly recommend that you pick it up. The final mother character that I want to talk about today is actually from a fantasy graphic novel series, and that is the character of Elena or Alana from Saga, the fantasy graphic novel series by Brian K. Vaughn and Fiona Staples. So this series is actually on hiatus right now and has been since 2018, but it still is unfinished. So I will call it my favorite graphic novel series that is still currently being written. It is kind of a mashup of Star Wars meets Romeo and Juliet. You follow two main characters who are members of two alien races that have been in a very long war. And the war is being carried out across the galaxy because the ruling parties don't want to destroy these two main planets. And the two alien races are kind of colloquially known as the wings and the horns because some of them have horns and the other group of them have wings and can fly. And what the setup is that there are two individuals from these two societies who have fallen in love and started a secret relationship. And the very first page of this graphic novel is a very graphic depiction of childhood. The main character, Alana, is having her baby for this man that she has met and who is on the opposite side of this war. And this is a very frank, very truthful depiction of both motherhood and just parenthood in general. You get the perspective of Alana and of her husband or her partner. So if you are a mother or a father, I think that you can identify greatly with these characters, but it is definitely a crude, kind of raunchy depiction of life and sexuality and parenthood. It is very strange, very odd. There are a lot of really strange plot threads, but if you like weird fantasy, I don't think that you can find a better graphic novel series than this. I love these characters. I love the setup. The art is gorgeous. And I think that Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples are just not afraid to go there. They will go places. But you don't ever feel like it is for shock value. Or at least I didn't feel like it was for shock value. Maybe some people do. But they push the boundaries. They push the limits of what you can depict in a graphic novel, and I think that it is very, very well done. You get to see the perspective of the parents of the story, but you also get this intermittent narration by their daughter, Hazel, that is taking place at some unidentified point in the future. And so you get to see the actions that these two characters carry out as parents and how it affects their daughter in real time, but then also you get her commentary from the future. So you get this very nuanced portrayal of family dynamics and how what you mean to do can sometimes have consequences that you did not foresee. The ways in which we parent our children sometimes have consequences that we wouldn't believe would be possible at the time. We obviously, as parents, if you are a parent, you know that it is basically a never-ending disaster where you feel like you're trying to do the right thing and you're never sure of what the right thing actually is. And there's obviously a lot of fear that centers around parenthood about, am I making the right choice? Am I making them strong? Am I helping them face the realities of the world? And I think that through this graphic novel series, series. We get to see how sometimes you mess up, how sometimes the things that you mean to do are not what actually happens. And it is a really great celebration of parenthood and all of the highs and lows that come along with that. But those are my 5 favorite portrayals of motherhood in the fantasy medium. If you have read other books that focus around fantasy moms, if you have some suggestions, or if you've read these books, then please let me know your thoughts. And I know that this weekend, as I said, in North America is Mother's Day. So I just like to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the expectant mothers, to all of the mothers who are happily kind of living out their parenting lives, to a very heartfelt and empathetic Mother's Day to those who have been mothers but have lost their children, and to all of the single parents out there or the households without moms who are kind of doing that job all by themselves. I commend you all. Motherhood is definitely the most difficult thing that I have ever tackled, and I wish you all the best. I hope that you found some great books to read here, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye.